Hello, my name is Michelle, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. On the podcast with me today is Jill Palleschi of Jula Paper Co. Jill created Jula Paper Co. out of a passion for design and the love of celebrations, both big and small. Jill believes that branding should be accessible to everyone, and she supports business owners at all levels as they create brands representative of their business. Listen in today as we discuss the story of our brand, how to not be trendy, but to create a long-lasting brand, and what to do if you can't afford a custom brand when you're first starting your business. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hi, Jill. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Oh, I'm glad to have you here as well. So just to be fair for all those who are listening, we have worked together for many years on some of the different branding pieces and parts of my company. Anything that you see that you think looks like ugly or garish, I have done it completely on my own. Anything that you see that is beautiful and lovely, I am certain that Jill and Kate together have had a hand in making me look really, really great. So I am very appreciative, Jill, for how you have supported me and my team. And not only all of this, but you also have developed all of my branding for Matrique Solutions. And it's been an exciting process because it's so different than everything else that I've done. And I think you even said it was different than some of the work that you had done.
It absolutely was. And it was really fun to see it from your concept through the brand development. And I can't wait to see when it's all complete. But it was definitely out of my wheelhouse and stretched my creative muscles. And it was really fun to work on.
Yeah, because in Matrique, just a couple of things, we had to come up with a brand, but we were also trying to work around some trademark challenges that were happening at the same time. And it wasn't the normal, here are one or two colors or three colors. We needed an entire color palette to be able to handle all of the coloration for a visual dashboard inside a software application. Right?
It's a lot. Yeah. There were a lot of colors involved, but seeing the way that you needed it to develop from a number standpoint and also from a creative standpoint was definitely the most challenging part. And I think we did a good job blending all of those colors to be complementary and keep the focus on your logo. The few previews I've seen, everything looks really great. So I'm excited to see the finished product.
Yeah. It's one of those things I think with any creative process, the longer you're removed from that creative process, you don't always remember even the emotion that it evokes or what you have to think through. And again, I developed Scarlet Thread as a major logo back in 2003. And I worked with, at that point, a woman who did branding for Chick-fil-A. And so she was used to branding huge companies, and we went through the branding for Scarlet Thread. And then over the years, that certainly developed. And we're going to even talk about, as part of our conversation, about updating some of your brand and brand resources and collateral. But this one was one that was completely brand new from scratch, serving a slightly different market or a more open ideal client, if you will, than the more narrow view that I have for my ideal client within Scarlet Thread. But it also made me kind of, I would even love to hear your thoughts on this before we even jump in. There was an emotional connection to the fonts, to the colors, to not just to the colors, but to the colors together. Like which color looks good next to this color if I were to put them on a graph together. It may be that there are two colors that I love, but put together so that they could be graphed in a line or whatever, it might come out where it didn't look so good. And I don't know that I think because I had not done this before And this level of let's have 78 colors versus 3. Just kidding. But it was an emotional connection and an emotional process. Do you see that happen in some of the other brands that you do? And how did you even feel on the emotional side of creating something like this that was a bit different?
Yeah, absolutely. I do see that a lot. And ironically, I tend to see it more with new business owners. I think there's a decision paralysis sometimes because the project in front of you seems so big. And I think that's maybe part of what played in with Matrique as well. That Scarlett brand is established. You know what you like. You very clearly know who your ideal customer is. Not that you don't know who that is on Matrique, but because it was brand new, there seemed to be a million decisions instead of 10. So that's sometimes where I always advocate that reaching out to a designer and even just talking through the process and your vision is helpful, because taking your emotional component out of it makes the decision a little bit easier sometimes.
Yeah. And I definitely leaned heavily on you and on Kate to say, okay, this is what I'm thinking and feeling, but steer me or tell me what you're thinking and feeling, wanting a little bit more of that group think than just here's who I am and here's what I want. And I think that ultimately that conversation made it so much better. And I also I think this is important too, as we jump into more of a branding discussion, Jill, and that is making sure that you connect with the person that's helping you do it. Because Absolutely. I think we both knew coming into this, because we had worked together on some Scarlet Thread things, that this was different for both of us, right? Yeah. But you were willing to have the conversation to see if it's something that you wanted. And it's not that you didn't know how to brand it or anything. It's just, it was a different type of offering and package than what we both would normally do. But what excited me was that you were like, okay, this is different, but you caught the vision. Right? You could start to see what I was trying to create and to produce and the problems that we were trying to solve in the marketplace, so that when you could kind of put yourself in that headspace, I thought it was fun. And it really energized me that you were as excited about what you were building to represent what I was building as a tool. And so it kept me even more engaged in the process. I mean, because we made decisions quickly as you can in a creative process, right? You have a process, and we tried to follow it as closely as we could, but there was still a lot to think about. Do you always I'm assuming that you have to have some level of excitement to say yes to a project, but Absolutely. You felt it too, didn't you? Where you're like, this is kind of like, I don't know, it's just something fun to get to do that's different.
Absolutely. I work with so many creative industries, and Matrique there's still a creative component behind it, but the number and the financial background that was needed to fully conceptualize what it was going to look like was really different for me. And combining those two areas, that you were attracting a client who is very driven by visuals, is very aesthetically savvy, but also reminding us that this tool is very numbers driven and really built to help them understand what their business looks like from a financial perspective. Really combine two worlds that you don't see together often.
Yeah, I think it's made the entire Matrique journey fun and exciting. It's made it Absolutely. Difficult and hard. I'm not going to lie. It has not been a straight line. But to see people like you who could use your talent and your gifts, you could catch the vision with me, and then you could help guide me and direct me. And you did your own research. Like, what does this look like? What does this mean? How do they feel when they see this? All those things that I've had churning in me, you allowed to churn in your creative process. And I think that is what makes the connection between whoever is listening today when they're choosing their branding specialist. I think you have to really choose someone, whether you're spending $3 or $3 million, somebody who can catch your vision, who sees what you can see, who can see it bigger and better even than you can see it, but who understands and can kind of get into the story. You placed yourself in the story of Matrique is what I would say. And you've done the same thing for Scarlet Thread Consulting. You've placed yourself inside the story that my brand is telling. Have you ever thought of it like that?
I haven't. And I really like the way you said that.
Yeah. I'm really great at market messaging for everybody else but myself. So if I ever had to write that down, I could probably not do it. But I do think that's part of it, is the brand is telling a story. And so the person who's helping you visually illustrate that brand has to be able to understand and put themselves there, right? As the reader, as the writer, as all of it, the producer, the publisher, all of it. So let's take a minute and take one step back, Jill. Tell everybody a little bit about, well, clearly they know you do branding now because we just went there, but tell them a little bit about how you got started, your background, and a little bit about the company that you have and who you serve. And then we'll jump more into some other branding conversations.
Sure. I have had a pretty non-traditional route to my current business. I was actually a biology major in college and changed my mind when I left school about what was next. I was also an athlete and I played women's ice hockey for the University of Vermont. And when I left school, I felt really lost and took a job with a sports publishing company who was willing to train graphic design for people who had no experience. And so I went to work for them for almost 5 years. And that is how I became a graphic designer. I never took a class in my life. I never had any formal training. A few career changes after that. I wasn't doing graphic design for businesses anymore. I was doing digital marketing, but I always kept my business small and on the side. I was doing wedding invitations. That was 15 years ago when all of my friends were getting married and it seemed like a natural fit. And that really grew into a social stationery business. I have a shop on Etsy. I do birthday invitations and birth announcements, christenings, bat mitzvahs. And 4 years ago, when I was working for Toys R Us corporate and they closed, my husband and I decided that this was an opportunity to see what was next for my business instead of going back to the corporate world. I had 3 boys under the age of 5 at the time, and I felt a calling to be home with them on a more flexible schedule. And that's when I really entered the world of branding. I have to give Kate credit because she was really the one that pushed me into that. I worked as a white label designer behind her brand for a year. And after a year, we decided that I would kind of venture out on my own and we would work together, referring clients to each other when it was the right fit, but that we both needed some equal face time with our customers. And that's how I ended up with Jula, where it is now. My business is primarily driven by branding for other small businesses, but I also still have a social stationery component to my business. Holiday cards are my biggest part of that. And I really love the relationship I've built on both sides, and I can't see myself getting rid of either one of them. So while they're different, they're both equally as fun for me. And so they're both going to stick around for a while.
I love it. You helped me do my holiday cards this year.
I did.
I actually did New Year's cards.
Yes.
Instead of the Christmas holiday kind of thing, I did a New Year's card. And so
they're becoming very popular.
Yeah. Well, you know what it does is just a quick segue, it removes the pressure of having to get them out in the Christmas rush. I felt like I could take a deep breath, and I even addressed them all the week after Christmas, which is when I had more time to think anyway. And really what I wanted to tell the people that I support, my clients, is cheers to the new year. And so,
absolutely.
But the card was lovely and beautiful, and it fit in with all of my new updated branding on Scarlet Thread. So I was appreciative, and I thought it was pretty, and I thought it represented the company that I have very, very well. So I can totally see how that would fit in. So, Jill, before we jump in, you and I had a conversation before we started just about making, and we're going to talk about it even in a deeper way, but really making branding accessible. Share with me just a minute and with the listeners why you feel so strongly that branding should be accessible when you're starting your business, throughout the journey of having your business, and that it shouldn't be something that is only there for the elite or only there for those that are starting a business with $10 million in their pocket.
Absolutely. Branding, obviously, as a graphic designer, I think it's one of the most important aspects of your business, but I don't think that it should be something that you go into debt over. I don't think that it's something you should lose sleep at night for making this financial investment about. I really believe that branding does not have to be something that you have to save for years for, because I have seen the impact that branding can have when you have a clean and sophisticated brand and you use it correctly from the very start of your business. I know when I started my business, there were plenty of things that I couldn't afford. Luckily, I was a graphic designer, so branding wasn't really part of that. But I do have a soft spot for businesses that are just starting out. And I have said it before, and I will say it again, that when you're brand new and you don't have money to spend, the best thing to do is to typeset a logo on your own. Canva is a wonderful place to start, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but there's a way to get started without spending thousands of dollars. And actually, I would argue that unless you're in a unique position where you're starting a business and crystal clear about who you are serving and what you want your brand to look like, you're probably not ready to spend those thousands of dollars up front. After you're in business for a few years and you realize who you enjoy working with, who you don't enjoy working with, that is a really good time to talk about rebranding. People come to me at all walks of their career path, and some people are looking to change their business name. Some people are looking to upscale their logo that they did a few years ago and they feel like they've outgrown it. And that's really the sweet spot. That is where we can figure out exactly what it's supposed to look like, what your color palette's supposed to be. And that is really when we speak and someone on the other line is so passionate and ready for this next step, that's when I say that you're ready to invest in custom branding.
I totally agree with you on that. When I think of starting a business at the very beginning, and I've started multiples, even Scarlet Thread Consulting, the beautiful thing was I just jumped off of my Scarlet Thread logo. My original one that was created back in 2003 was the Scarlet Thread. And then it had a needle that went through the flourish and down. Okay. And so because I was doing custom window treatments and custom sewing, we had this whole conversation at the time, because back in 2003 to 2022, we're at two different worlds apart. But at the same time, I was working in a lot of more traditional homes. I knew who my clients were. I knew their age range. I knew that at the time, color was really heavy in what we were doing. And it wasn't the white and gray that people are now moving away from again. We're moving back into color. It was very color saturated. We were the Southern living home kind of vibe. And the whole even conversation and idea behind my logo at the time was the flourish was kind of that whimsical, creative, we can go outside of traditional, but then the font set for Scarlet Thread was a little bit more traditional. So it was kind of the merging of the two and showing that things didn't have to be boring. And that's why we have the bright colors, which are also just colors that I love. So with all of that, when it was time to do Scarlet Thread Consulting, we took off the word "the," we took away the needle and just used the same font and did consulting. So that part I loved and was comfortable with. But I built my first website myself. I did a lot of that myself. I didn't have the money or didn't really think about the money to dump in. It was in a very interesting flux kind of time in my startup of the career. I had a business plan. I had all these things, but I was still trying to figure out. I mean, like now I would tell you, I don't even use the word consulting directly. I don't have a consulting package because everybody that hired me for consulting were my non-ideal clients. And so I took it off as an offering, yet it's still in the name of the company. So I do now what I call a consultative coaching approach. But all that to say, I wasn't as clear. I was clear, but it has become more clear over time. And then when I really got, as you said, more crystal clear, I then hired Kate and I was like, okay, build me the website, build the website that is going to take it. Did mine look okay? Yes. Did it solve the problem? Yes. Did it get me to the level that I needed to get to so that I could then feel like I was ready to invest the money because I really knew who I was? Yes. And then what's been interesting with Matrique is I came in knowing exactly what I wanted, who I wanted to serve, how I wanted to serve them, because I've already been doing that work in spreadsheet form. So it wasn't so brand. It was, yes, it's a brand new venture, but I had already been doing the work. So I already knew. And that's why I was willing to invest in that one before it's ever hit the ground. So again, I've been in it on both sides where I didn't have a lot of money to invest or didn't really know if I had invested at the very beginning, it would have probably looked much different than it did later versus one where I was very crystal clear on the outset and knew exactly what I wanted. I think that's true for websites. I think it's true for branding. I think it's true for everything. At some point, it really comes down to, I don't care how beautiful your brand is or how beautiful your website is or your note cards or anything. If you can't do the work and you're working with the wrong people, that's not going to keep the business floating. What it does is it opens doors for you to do what you love to do. So spending the time to really maximize your talent, your profits, your sales channels, and then creating kind of that messaging, that open door is what brings people in.
Absolutely.
So if you were to think about branding and what it is as a definition for you, and we know that every single person has a different definition for everything. Let's say for our conversation today, how would you define branding?
I normally like to talk about branding in terms of customer touch points, and that if you envision the way your customer is going to interact with your business from the first day they see you until you give them their final invoice or until you are wrapping up your package, they should be seeing your branding through every channel and every aspect and every touch point that they have with you. That's visually. That is the tone that you use when you speak to them. That is what they see on your website. It's how you write to them, how you write about your offerings. And so it's really a journey. It is the face of your brand, the face of your business. And it should really represent, obviously, your ideal client, but it should also be something that you love to visually look at and use on a regular basis.
I've shared this before, but I had a client at one point who had a growing business, was really doing awesome in her area, and she wanted to grow more. Mm-hmm. Yet she kept holding back from putting herself out there. And I asked her, I was like, tell me, what is it that's holding you back? And her comment was, I don't love my logo. And so I don't want it on the door of my workplace. I don't really want to put it, I don't want to hand it out. I don't want to do anything with it. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is such an easy thing to go fix. Why would we be holding back from networking opportunities, from speaking opportunities, from sales opportunities because we didn't like the visual representation of our company and our brand? And, I was actually shocked that she had thought deeply enough to realize that that's what it was. I don't know that she realized it at the outset, but, we really challenged, why are you not going after the low hanging fruit that's there? Like, what is it? And she's like, I don't feel like the logo represents who we are and what we do. I feel like it looks maybe young, or it looked, in her words, maybe cheesy. And it had been, I think, self-developed. And so that leads me into, I know we talked about when you feel like you really know who you are and what you want to do, but when is it time to either up level a brand, refresh a brand, or start to come into your own and really create that first brand outside of maybe Designs by Michelle kind of idea? That is what mine started with years and years back in 2000. It was Designs by Michelle. Yeah, because I was so creative like that. And that lasted for about 2 years. And then I switched over to Scarlet Thread. But we got to start somewhere. And people paid me and they hired me and I worked and my business grew. They weren't as hung up on the name. I just knew it wasn't going to be the name that was going to carry me through with all of the ideas that I had. But what do you see? What do you recommend? And let's talk through that a little bit.
Sure. Just to go back to your comment about your client who felt like her logo, she was embarrassed of her logo and didn't want to share it. I think that it's so interesting to hear people say that, especially not to a designer. But I think something people don't realize too is that people feel this enormous responsibility to come to designers with this really clear vision of what their logo should be. And that is not your responsibility. That's ours. We work through that process together. And I think that's a really big hang up for a lot of people. They feel like they're going to spend money and they're supposed to come to us with all the answers. And I'd like to tell you and your listeners that that's not the case.
It actually makes your work more difficult.
It does. And there are some people who have a very clear vision, and those people they're never sharing things that are trendy. They're never sharing things that they've seen elsewhere on Instagram or Pinterest. They come with this crystal clear thought, and maybe it's not perfect, but we get it there. But then there's a big group of people who say that I have no idea what I want my logo to look like, but I know that I've outgrown it, and I know that it's time. But to answer your question about when you know that time is right, you kind of hit the nail on the head that when you feel like it doesn't represent your work and your business anymore, that's the time. I've had so many clients come to me with these portfolios of thousands of beautiful images of interiors and photographers with their wedding images, and they show me their logo, and it is so clear that their work and their brand just don't line up anymore. And that's a really natural evolution. So it's okay to admit that it doesn't represent my work. It doesn't represent my ideal client. And that really is the best time to invest in your branding.
So one of the things that we have done when we have been working on, I'll just say, refreshing the Scarlet Thread brand, and I can use my own as an example. Like I said, when it was first developed and when we did a lot, bold color was in. And then we've gotten to a place where everything, even in logos, everything is white, gray, beige, very, very, very understated. And one of the things that I think that I had started to do on my own, and then you just really exploded more for me, was adding in some other fonts, some more updated fonts. And we're talking about more in my customer facing documentation and things like that. Right. But updating that and then adding in some of those softer tones of color, some of the neutrals to balance the heavy color. And it changes over the years. And I think that's important as well. Even though my Scarlet Thread Consulting logo is not changing, it's some of the work around it, the fonts around it, like I'm not tied to the same font. And I'll say this. I kind of thought that after I went through my first branding exercise and we chose all my fonts, I don't remember when you and I did that. That was, years ago in Scarlet Thread world. I almost felt like, well, I'm stuck with those fonts forever. And that's not the case, right? I might be stuck with the font in the logo, but that doesn't mean that I've got to use only that font for every single thing that I do going forward in the rest of my website and correspondence or anything else. And so you just kind of giving me permission to go, let's update some of these fonts. Let's change the way that we are showing things. Let's add some softness of color here, and let's balance kind of that. Those demanding, red and purple are demanding. Let's just be honest, they are demanding. But let's balance that with something that's softer and soother so that I can rest as it works through, so that we can kind of guide the reader the way we want to do that. And I think sometimes some of us can, well, I can, I'll just speak for me. I can be a rule follower. And so when I am told that I'm supposed to use Lato, I'm thinking, move away. I can only use Lato, when there could easily be another font added in with it that could be beautiful and actually make the Lato show up so much better than if I only used one font.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you don't, especially when we're talking about the projects that we just completed for you. And actually, I just worked with another client who was in a very similar situation. Your brand color palette and your fonts is meant to be the primary, and it's meant to be the introduction. But when you're talking about large pieces of content, marketing collateral that is 10 plus pages long, you also have to remember that there's a human behind it, and that using bold color palettes on every page is exhausting to the eye. And so making your brand continuity through the entire document is done in accents. Your reader is happier. They're not exhausted when they get to the end of your document. And you feel like it's a softer, more sophisticated approach to deliverables that they're looking at on a regular basis.
And let's be honest, it's easier on a printer too. You know, that, right? I'm serious. It's something that I think about. My colors are so saturated and so dark and so heavy, which again, I love my colors, but I know what they do to a printer when you're printing anything in color. It can be a lot. So how often do you Well, let me back up before I ask how often.
Sure.
One of the things that I have seen and experienced, and that really draws me to continue working with you, Jill, is that you have a different approach to this. There are quite a few branding companies out there that don't necessarily offer brand refreshes. And so if you go to work with them, you literally have to be willing to throw everything that you have away because they want to start over. It's almost like the idea of, I'm not willing to help you design in a room where you want to keep a few pieces. I have to start with a clean room.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of that. And I get that in some cases, like if everything needs to be trashed, it needs to be trashed. But you never pushed me to throw my scarlet thread. You asked me, are you happy with it? Does it still represent you? So you gave me space to have that as an opening. But when I said to you, I still love my logo. I still love it. I can't even imagine another logo for me, but I'm totally open to changing any and everything else around it. I'm not tied to any of the rest of it. It's on the table.
Right.
You were willing to step into that part of the branding process and say, okay, we're going to keep these pieces, but now how can we elevate and how can we accentuate and how can we utilize this and keep moving? And I do trust that if it had been a horrible, horrible mistake, you would have told me. And even on Matrique, when we started that conversation, I did have some parameters because of the way that we were having to trademark some things.
Right.
But I still told you, I said, I don't want to tie your hands on this. I want to tell you the parameters that I'm going to have to work in, that I need you to work within, but I want you to have the freedom to explore. Do you see people that come to you that say, when I call some of the other branding teams, the only way they'll work with me is if I throw everything away? And some of it may have been custom branding that they had already invested in and still loved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that is the product of the way certain branding companies work. I think that for some businesses, that is probably the right decision. But there are a lot of reasons that someone might not be okay with that. And, there could be parts of their brand that are incredibly emotional to them I think I used this example when I spoke with Kate last year, but if your grandmother taught you to sew on a vintage sewing machine and you have a vintage sewing machine in your logo, and that is really important to you, I fully respect that. That is part of your brand story. It's part of your journey. It's part of your why and how you started your business. And I think it's really important to honor the customer's requests when they feel really passionately about keeping something. I saw a wonderful example last night on Instagram from another designer who did a brand refresh. And I saved it, and I would actually love to reshare it because I think she did such a great job of honoring the original logo. But people get tied to their branding and their logos. And if you're ready for a refresh or something a little different, more polished, sophisticated, and you just happen to love this one aspect, we can work with that. There's no reason to say no. Everything is open and a conversation. And I want to hear your why, because if you feel that strongly about keeping something, it's really part of the heart of your brand and should continue in the next phase.
I love that. And there is a time to throw everything out and start over. There absolutely is a time for that. I just know that, and I've been there, right? Like I said, Designs by Michelle didn't make it through the full cut. Everything that had been designed for that got trashed. And there was an entire process where we started over. But going forward, it has been more tweaks to that. And then we started over fresh with Matrique. Even as far as I asked you not to carry the colors over, the exact colors. I'm like, start with a clean, fresh color palette just to have something that was completely different. So when you refresh a brand, I'll tell you what I've seen. And I know if I've seen it, and it's not even my area of expertise, you've probably seen it. But I think sometimes it's kind of like the equivalent of, as a homeowner, we'll say, going into the model home in a subdivision and taking pictures of every window treatment and all of the designs and thinking that's what they want to duplicate, or going out to Pinterest and going, I need to duplicate that because that's what's working right now, or the front of some well-known home magazines and going, I just want to do that. Right. For lack of that creativity on their own, right? And they see it and they like it and they think, well, let's just do that. I think the same thing can happen when people are going into their branding, because I went through a phase where every logo I saw looked, I don't want to call out what it looked like because there might be a lot of listeners who have that logo, but they all looked very similar. Maybe for a season, they all looked very architectural, or they looked very monogramish, or they looked, we can go through seasons of all of it.
Yeah.
And I think that what's most important when you choose a branding specialist, you or others, is that they're not just tied to the trend of the day. I think you have to be aware of what's trending. You have to be aware of how people are engaging with brands. But Home Depot doesn't go out and change their logo every year because there's a new color palette, and they're not changing it every year because people right now are mid-century and then they're going back to new traditional or whatever. They have what they have. Do you see that though, when people come to you and everything just almost looks like a cut, copy and paste?
I saw it more several years ago. I feel like there's a new shift in people who at least come to me. And I'm not saying that's specifically about my business, but I see it bigger than that. And I think it's more than branding too. We went through this stage over the last 4 or 5 years where the design of homes and the type of clothing and things were very trendy for a while. But I think people are moving away from that and understanding that, especially when it comes to a brand, and hopefully when it comes to yourself and your home and other things, that being the Pinterest image or copying the Pinterest image isn't the goal. That representing you, who you are, who your business is, and the longevity of that is really more important than the current trends. I did see it a few years ago, but I have to say I've been really lucky in the last year or two that everyone who's come has never picked a trend, said they loved a trend, shared another logo that was trendy. I try and ask people not to share logos with me that they really love, unless there's something that they can't articulate verbally, that they can, find an image of. Because I think that it ruins the process slightly. I like to start everything with a fresh set of eyes. And everyone
it kind of plants a seed, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of the creative challenge of being a brand designer too, is that part of our exercise is a Pinterest exercise where I ask you to pin images unedited of all the things that represent your brand. And so, for example, if I'm speaking to an interior designer, that could be interiors, but it should also be food and outfits and jewelry, patterns, anything that you truly believe you would find in your customer's home, in their closet, other stores that they shop at and things like that, but no logos. And then I edit that down. That's part of my design process, to really find the theme, the overall colors, the direction that your brand will move in. And I really have been amazed with what people have shared with me over the last couple of years in terms of that exercise, because it's not all trendy. And that's really refreshing to see.
So it was funny that you say that. So yesterday I was talking to one of the designers that I coach, and we were talking about the fact that I think some of our trendy stuff is getting ready to get a big shot in the arm because we can't get anything fast and quick anymore. Everything's seriously on a slow boat. And so stuck out in the ocean somewhere. And so we are starting to see a lot more recycling, upcycling, a lot more thrift and vintage. I mean, we're seeing it pop up everywhere. What's old is new again. Heck, just look at the Super Bowl halftime show.
Yeah.
Right? What's old is new again. All these people are acting like this. And we're like, oh, girl, that was my young years, right? But we're seeing it. And she was even making the comment that they were doing some antiquing recently on a trip she and her husband were, and they were looking at some pieces of silver, and that there were some young people in there looking at the same types of pieces of silver, and they were silver collecting in their late 20s. I just saw an article the other day that said fine china is making a comeback. My son got married last year. There was no fine china on the list. They're like, we don't, well, they didn't do it because they were getting family china from the bride's side of the family. But a lot of these young people are, I don't need China. I don't need all that stuff. We know we went through all those years of everybody throwing all that stuff away. I was walking through all the thrift stores with my husband. And I'm like, had that in the 70s, had that in the 80s. I wish we'd have kept all that. Right. Yeah. And I say that only because I think that people are going back and looking at the sustainability of some of the things we had. They're looking across timelines. They're looking what was important in the 20s and the 30s, not just what's new. And there's this more blended approach to all of it that we're seeing even in our consumption. And if once we start seeing it in our consumption, then it does play over into the other aspects of life and business. And so it's just neat that you're able to see that.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that is making a comeback. I have always been really into mixing styles and, our furniture we have dressers that are 100 years old from my husband's family. And then we have brand new pieces. 50% of the artwork in our home was found in an attic that we restored and framed. And it all comes down to part of the story. I love that those things tell a story, and whether your brand is completely brand new or there's pieces from your business that you've built over the last 20 years, that's part of the story too. And I like that, I like when people come sharing that aspect of their business because there's something there, and maybe you're ready for something that looks a little bit different, but the heart of your brand and what's important is still the same as it was 10 or 15 years ago.
See, that just goes right back to the very beginning where I said you're able to jump into the middle of their story. And it's what you do so well. So, all right. So let's say that we go through this process. What happens when the branding process is over?
So for most clients, I will package up their final brand assets depending on what they've asked for. And that is everything from your primary logo and a brand style guide all the way down to social media templates, business cards, really whatever it is that you asked for. And then after branding's over, usually a client's moving on to updating their website. So there's a large period of time where I'm not needed and I pass them off to somebody else to update that part of their brand. But I do also offer clients design days, which are a bulk of time, a half or full day at a discounted hourly rate, where we can revisit their brand at any time. It can be used for marketing collateral, social media templates. It could be used for tissue paper creation, custom stamps. I just created a 20-page pricing guide for a previous client. That time and those hours are dedicated to whatever you need in your business at that moment with a super quick turnaround time. I have learned that I work better when I work on one project at a time, and that clients can't always wait the average lead time for me to start working on their project. So we pick a day that is mutually agreed upon by both of us, and we get all those projects done by the end of the day. In the worst case scenario, sometimes the next morning, but you walk away with everything you need updated, and it is a really quick and efficient process. So I have customers who come back multiple times, 6, 10 design days. And that's really where the continuity of the relationship with your brand designer goes from there. I always am working with other clients, but there are usually 2 to 3 days a month I reserve specifically for things like that.
I have taken part in a few of those days and always have a few more on the list coming. But I want to just speak to the process of that. Number one, of course, I love your work or I wouldn't keep coming back, but I love the process of those days. One thing that it requires my team and I to do on our side is to pull everything together at once and to set priority. But I know when I first started these design days with you, I looked at it and I had so much more than I could have, than either of us could have even handled in a day, right? Even having a conversation about. But what was also interesting to me is by doing them and revisiting things in big chunks of time, there is the continuity. And I always liked it because some of the things we worked together to create the priority, those actually drove the decisions that we would make for the next batch of things that we were running through so that we could kind of put things together. We realized we've already made some of these I would say, bigger brand decisions or bigger visual decisions. Now, this is what it would look like over here, or let me create this one and then we can tweak it and we'll have 3 versions of the one. But I have really, really enjoyed those days because then I feel like I'm really getting things done versus a trickle of one thing at a time. Because you can start to look like there are times right now that I can look at my website and I can tell where I've updated it in different chunks. And so that's why sometimes it's nice to just kind of do a clean sweep and clean everything up. Right. I mean, I'm just being transparent. Like I get stuck in the same thing everybody else does. But it has been awesome because that day you'll take a few hours and then we're just back and forth, getting it nailed down. And at the end of the day, you've got your PDFs or you've got your downloads or whatever it is that you need, and you can move on and start using them immediately. So that instant gratification is fun, but it requires me to be process driven beforehand. And that's a good thing.
Absolutely. The process that I go through on my end and ask that you go through on your end it's one of those things where we always say it's hard to, we have hundreds of clients, but it's really hard to work on your own business. And when there's a date and a deadline, you're more driven to get organized and get it done. And I also have found that similar to the way I work, customers really appreciate the quick decision making, because if we weren't working in this design day and I sent you something for approval, you may look at it and then go make dinner. And then by the time you get back to it, it's 2 days later and it's not an efficient process for anyone. You look at it, you get back to me right away. It doesn't require that you have to be at your computer all day, but it's just a back and forth ongoing conversation about proofs and approvals. And giving people a shorter window to review and give comments helps the decision-making process. Otherwise, you can make decisions for months.
Well, and again, I like the idea that we're looking at multiple, at least in my experience, we looked at multiple pieces of collateral at one time and looking at all of them the same way that you said you like to get into the story to create the initial brand. It allows you to get in the story of all the different pieces of documentation that we have so that we didn't make some decision on one piece of documentation without considering, could we carry that through to other pieces, and kind of having to go back and revisit it. So that has been really great. So is that the type of service that you would also have available if somebody says, you know what, I've got my brand has been refreshed. I'm good with that piece, but I need other things. Tell us about the services that you would offer for those individuals or businesses.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I've worked with a handful of people who I was not their brand designer, and I'm happy to help them execute the next pieces. There are several brand designers who don't offer those continuation services, and that's okay for them and their business, but you may need other things in a month or 5 months or 2 years after your brand was created, and I'm happy to help. I do like to make sure that there is a brand before we get into those design days. Seeing a brand style guide with fonts and colors and the hex codes is really helpful in creating that additional collateral for people. But as long as that exists in some capacity, I'm happy to really help anyone create what they need with their brand at the forefront.
That's awesome. Jill, is there anything else that you can think of that you want to share with our listeners today?
I don't think so. This was such a fun conversation about branding. I love the opportunity to talk about it. Obviously, I talk to my customers about their branding, but talking about it more conceptually and diving into why it's important and why I love it is always fun.
I'm going to ask one question that before we end, and that
Sure.
is the podcast, of course, is Profit is a Choice. And I do think that having a beautiful, and beautiful, of course, is everybody's idea of beautiful, right? So it's not just one version of that, but having a beautiful, well thought out brand that you are proud of, it absolutely does increase the profitability. In my opinion, it increases the profitability of the sale of your confidence level. Like my client who didn't want to put it out on her door, didn't want to go to marketing events. There's a pride that comes with looking at that visual interpretation of your business and wanting to advance that business and that offering and that service. It just changes. It's like putting on that really great outfit. You want to go out, you hold your head up a little bit differently than when you feel like you're kind of in your comfy, slouchy clothes and maybe I should have dressed a little bit better. And I think when your logo and when your branding feels like comfy, slouchy clothes and you are going to cocktail hour, then it might be time to think about that. But could you think of any other quick ways that we could define just how having a really great brand and a consistent brand can improve the profitability in your business?
In addition to what you said, I mean, I think it's a self-awareness and a confidence boost to have something you're really proud of. But as an incredibly visual person, I can see it from a customer standpoint as well, that I make a lot of decisions about who I work with, not in my business, but who we work with in our home renovations and businesses I interact and shop with in town, that if you have a brand and a website that feels really polished and professional, and it sounds so simple, but like an easy way to contact you and ask questions, that is part of the experience that makes me want to spend money with you. And I think that's a perspective to have when you're going through the brand process, is remembering that aside from being proud, that your customers are incredibly visual people as well and driven by aesthetics, and that upgrading and refreshing and having something that feels really you and really professional will eventually turn into a better profit for your business.
I love it. So true. So Jill, tell people where you're hanging out in social media or on your website. Where's the best place for them to find out more about you?
Sure. My website is julapaper.co, and that's Jula paper.co. Jula is named after my children, which is a fun story to read on my website if you head over there. And my social media handles are the same at Jula Paper.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing with my listeners today. Thank you so much for helping me with my own branding and collateral. And I can't wait for us to celebrate when Retreat gets out. It may already be out when this comes out. We'll see. But it's close.
Me
it's
too.
getting close.
I can't wait.
All right. Thanks, Jill.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
It's been so great personally to work with Jill over the years. Feel free to check out the look of Metrique Solutions at www.metriquesolutions.com to see the color palette and the logo design. You can also sign up for the newsletter and upcoming information on the launch of this financially robust software application that will allow you to take control of your financials. I'm so excited. And if you're a successful design business and you're looking for a business coach to help you create a more sustainable and scalable firm, I would love for you to apply for a discovery call at scarletthreadconsulting.com. Create a brand that you're proud of and that represents your work. It really does lead to profits, and that's not by accident. Profit is a Choice is proud to be part of the designnetwork.org, where you can discover more design media reaching creative listeners. Thanks for listening, and stay creative and business minded.